Hero from Pretoria. Is everything all right? People talk, say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
I believe you are quite aware the situation has changed since last we spoke.
The truth is still the truth, and a bargain is still a bargain.
And Mayor Cermak is now deceased.
Yes. What does that have to do with our contract?
I do not recall signing a contract with you, Mr. Allan.
We had a verbal agreement. I'm sure my uncle here will attest to that.
Nathan, please. You're being most rude.
But Dawes reacted just as I knew he would.
Lewis, as a family man, I quite understand your position. As for you, young Mr. Heller, you should not have spoken to the papers of this. It was a breach of confidence.
Nothing was said of our arrangement being a confidential one. Besides which, I was in fact discreet.
How so?
I didn't tell the reporters why I was offered the job at the fair. Void our deal, sir, and I'm going to be put into an embarrassing light. I will have to inform the press of your involvement.
This reeks of blackmail, young man.
It reeks of business. Our arrangement is binding in my view, and if you feel differently, I'll be noisy about it.
Nathan.
I'm not a big wheel like you, General, but us little wheels can get good and goddamn squeaky when we don't get our grease.
My secretary will have contracts ready for you to sign this afternoon at 4. Please return and sign them. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your collector friend, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, the perhaps never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett. And I'm, of course, Rob casting at you, right here from the Rob Observatory. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode 1020. You know, I have been a fan of science fiction pretty much my entire life, since I really discovered it and knew what it was since I was 5 years old. When I was 5 years old, I had my great enlightenment, if so to speak. I mean, I started watching Star Trek and strip syndication. I started seeing Twilight Zone. I saw Planet of the Apes for the first time, at least the narrative that I tell myself. This is how I remember it. I don't know how true it is, but it did pick up from there. A year later, the animated Star Trek series debuted, and I was already a huge fan, even though it went reverse. I mean, some people, my friend Darren Doctorman, discovered Star Trek through the animated series first, and then came back to the original series. I saw it. I'd already seen Star Trek, so when they made an animated version of it, it was like, oh my God. And then from there, in the 1970s, living in Seattle, we had Sci-Fi Theater on Channel 11 every Sunday at 2 o'clock. I would come home from Sunday school. Yes, I had a Jewish education. I was adopted into a Jewish family and I had to go to Sunday school. I had to go to Temple D. Hirsch, or because it was Reformed Judaism, we called it Temple D. Church, which is kind of funny. My family's foundation built a chapel there, the Schoenfeld Gardner Foundation chapel at the synagogue. But when I was bar mitzvahed, I didn't want to get bar mitzvahed in there because it wasn't as ornate as the main. It was where the Torah was. Come on, man. I wanted to be in the cooler one. But anyway, science fiction and speculative fiction of all kinds has always been a huge deal for me. And it really instilled in me a sense of awe and wonder, not just in the universe around us, but in the world that we lived in. And throughout my entire life, I mean, beginning with the first thing that really I thought was amazing was VCRs. You know, I was able to get a VCR in 1980 for my bar mitzvah. That was my big present for my bar mitzvah. It was an RCA VFT 625 VHS player, and that's what led me to I could start time shifting and watching movies late night that only the TV guide would make me promises of because my parents wouldn't let me stay up. In 1976, my mom took me to see Logan's Run. And what was Logan's Run about? It was about a post-apocalyptic society that was living underneath domed cities controlled by a computer system that at 30, you would have to go to the fiery ritual of carousel and renew. And, for those years, you could live your life, as they said in the ad line for the movie, the perfect world of total pleasure. There's just one catch, which was you had to die at 30, which kind of sucked, which led me to the book where I found out, the book by George Clayton Johnson and William F. Nolan, you died at 21. Sandman, Sandman, leave my door, don't come back here anymore. But I was 9. I got to see some great nudity, Jenny Agutter. I mean, Star Trek already made me very interested in the ladies. Star Trek and science fiction also instilled in me a great love of women. I mean, my taste was defined by that. One of my first girlfriends, a woman that, this woman named Marina. I mean, she to me, it's a long story, but my second girlfriend, this girl named Marina, she was to this day probably the most beautiful creature I've ever seen in my life. But she looked like kind of an alien. She looked definitely like Starfire from the new Teen Titans. But so my entire life has been defined by science fiction. But what it has instilled in me was I wanted to understand. I remember Rollerball. Norman Jewison's 1975 Rollerball was a big deal when it aired. The first time it aired, I don't know it. It was on one of the major networks, and the future of Rollerball. In the future, wars will no longer exist, but there will be Rollerball. And there were no more nation states. There were only corporations. And they ran the world. Like Houston was the energy city. And, of course, James Caan played for the Houston team, which was the energy corporation, run by John Houseman, who was an evil motherfucker. I mean, he was the Darth Vader of his time in 1975 when that movie came out. I saw it later. But what was really interesting, I mean, as a kid, you're watching these sort of futuristic dystopian movies, which are inherently political, because how did the world get there? I mean, okay, there was a nuclear apocalypse in Logan's Run, but what did the survivors build this amazing technologically advanced dome city? At the time, I didn't think about it, but how did that happen? I don't know. Rollerball. There were the corporate wars. How did the corporate wars start? What happened to democracy? I don't know. You would watch these films and a lot of dystopian movies, which means society fell. Well, why did society fall? As a kid, I was like, what were the reasons? Was there a pandemic? You watch movies like Soylent Green, how overpopulation. Look, people were talking about climate change in science fiction movies 55 years ago. No Blade of Grass, which was turned into... No Blade of Grass was turned into No Blade of Grass. There's a science fiction movie that stars Oliver Reed called ZPG, Zero Population Growth. And then you flash forward 50 years and you see movies like Children of Men. All of these movies were political. They were all cautionary tales. They were talking about environmental collapse 60 years ago. Now we talk about it and you're like, oh, you're a libtard. I'm like, am I? I mean, I'm experiencing, we now live in a sci-fi dystopian world. It might not seem like it would, because it's not yet cinematic enough. There's so much going on that there isn't just one thing you can focus on. There's just, we've got birth rates plummeting. around the Western world because our ecosystem is so polluted, what we're putting into our bodies. And like, this isn't me. This isn't me like being political. You can look up these tables and people aren't having sex anymore. There's all kinds of craziness. So movies like ZPG and Children of Men, this is no longer science fiction. This is happening across the board. We have forever chemicals permeating our natural environment, all the way into fishing villages past Norway that shouldn't have any chemicals in them. Oh, those chemicals are there. And it's the dystopianness of our world today is all over the place. And yet we're still arguing. I mean, I think we should look, here's what I've always believed. Would you leave your kitchen 10% dirty? Like, would you leave 10% of your dirty dishes in some corner and just let them fester? Let the food mold and let the cockroaches build a whole environment. You wouldn't. So why is pollution allowed in a closed ecosystem like our planet? Why do we have there's a little bit, we can have this much arsenic in the groundwater. We can allow this many emissions, and it to me, it's a closed system. It's not going anywhere. The water on our planet does not come from outer space. It's the same water that's been here for billions of years. And if I say billions of years, some people will argue with me, Rob, that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Whatever. Anyway, and what I've always found interesting about, and I love science fiction horror stories, I've always loved stories about world-changing events. And when we watch things like Star Wars, or even Rollerball, we're dealing with the top elites that run everything. Because who wants to deal with the everyman in a dystopian civilization or a world, unless you're talking about like Don Johnson and A Boy and His Dog, somebody who's surviving on the... Have you guys seen A Boy and His Dog? Why do I even ask? Nobody's seen these science fiction movies anymore. Nobody. 1990. I stop at 1990, Rob. I don't watch anything before that. Well, let me tell you, in the 1970s, there's a lot of great dystopian science fiction to be had. Before Star Wars came out, science fiction was bleak and depressing, just the way I like it. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I do like it, but hey, in Dune Messiah, Paul Atreides is going to kill 61 billion people and subjugate 500 other planets and sterilize, 98? I don't know. I put it on Instagram the other day. Can't wait to see how all the Timothée Chalamet fans deal with him killing 61 billion people. It'll be fun to watch, though. But wait, that Zendaya, she's not being depicted correctly. Uh-oh. I don't know. Whatever. We live in a world now, though, that has surpassed... I mean, between watching YouTube videos about quantum computing advances just in the last couple of months, I mean, oh my God, it's surpassing anything. You go back, a fine 1976 film, Demon Seed, that stars Julie Christie, is about an AI that figures out a way to procreate. Not kidding. So he entraps a woman in a house, played by Julie Christie, and basically is going to grape her to create an artificial life form that isn't so artificial. This was in 1976. Have you not seen Demon Seed? I live. Come on, man. Demon Seed's great stuff. But anyway, all of these movies are political. And it made me, I am no political theorist, nor am I a political scientist. But what I'm always interested in is the one thing that is true in real life and true in movies and books. Whenever you have people that are way above the flotsam and jetsam of humanity, people that control amazing wealth, amazing technology, what they're doing, they have the power to change the world. But what is going to happen to 99% of the rest of the population of the planet? Not so interesting, not from a storytelling standpoint, so nobody cares. Now, we live in a world where, really birthed here in America, Silicon Valley, and the amazing science fiction technology of the information age has changed all of our lives. And, when I was playing with my friend's Apple IIc computer across the street, Pete Chambers, and loading up soft porn adventure on a cassette tape that took an hour, and then we'd have play a porn text game. Ooh, I mean, we've come a long way, baby. I can go to RedTube and see whatever I want if I want to watch, rimming videos. I can see them. They're right there. But that was a long way. Same computers, still Apple. You go, Microsoft. You go, Apple. Is Dell around? You go, Larry. You go, Oracle. Sure, why not? But anyway, you know what I'm saying. The problem is you now have people who have the power that are vastly beyond nation states. You have companies, even individuals, that are commanding money that are, I mean, you know, we can think our governments have power. Maybe our state governments, maybe our local governments have power. But on the national stage, smoke and mirrors, man. And, you know, I've never been a person that's believed in conspiracy theories. Because to me, it doesn't matter what's going on. Sure, there's just stuff that we don't know is happening. And when it comes right down to it, all the things that we don't know that are happening is all about money. And it's all about power and control. And you need power and control to get more money. That's basically it. I mean, I'd like to believe that there was in New York in the late 60s a coven of witches that were doing everything they could to make sure that the son of Satan was born, just like we see in Rosemary's Baby. I'd like to believe that that could have actually happened. And literally, the son of Satan was born. Satan in that movie comes up and has his way with Mia Farrow, Rosemary Woodhouse, while the coven stands by and watches. Creepy shit. And then, of course, he has his father's eyes. Spoiler alert, the baby is born, and Rosemary apparently is taken in by the coven and is going to raise the child of Satan. I always wondered, okay, the son of Satan is now walking the earth. Like, what's he going to do? If you have plumbing problems, is he going to make sure? Do you come up from the Stygian depths of hell and then have to, like, take care of public education? Make sure SAT scores are going to rise? What do you do if you're like, if you've actually, you're the devil and you've come up to take over the world? Are you going to, like, make sure people get universal basic income? Like, are you going to make sure that, like, the national parks are cleaned up? Like, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to run? And that was always where, like, whatever megalomaniac, you watch Bond movies, Hugo Drax, he builds Moonraker shuttles and he launches them from the Amazon and he has an orbiting base and he's going to use Orchidea Negro and he's going to kill everybody on Earth using the poison from orchids. Literally, that was his plan. And he kills everybody and then he's going to build the Aryan beautiful people race back on Earth. You know how long that's going to take? And what are you going to do, Hugo Drax, when there's no one? Who's going to turn off all the nuclear power plants when you've killed everybody on Earth? Who's going to stop a meltdown, Hugo Drax? They never really deal with that. But now we live in a world, especially since the election, since Trump was inaugurated, we have seen massive shifts. Even over the last week, you're talking about 80 years of political normalization and international, the way things swept away. Now, I mean, this is more exciting than a lot of the plotting of the movies I grew up watching. And I'm curious about why all of this is going on. Now, it's not necessarily, people don't want to get political because they really don't want to talk about, well, you believe this and you believe that, you libtards this, you libtards that, you Dems this, Republicans that. It's so weird because our focus, when people are getting in these political arguments, is so small-minded by design. Because what's really going on has nothing at all to do with anything. Whether books are being banned, trans rights, you're talking about taxes, Social Security, problematic. 72,000 Americans, they're now saying Social Security payments might get late. Whatever, I'm not into that. I'm talking about people that they're like Harry Seldon in the Foundation trilogy and all the Foundation books. Psychohistory. They're making moves. They don't look at the rest of humanity. You have people talk about the small wealth gap. It's not about the wealth. It's about the power and the people. With that wealth comes amazing power. They are completely above the controls that we all have to live with. And there's people talk about the income gap. It's not about the income gap. It's about people that are using technologies. You might as well have magical beings running systems around the entire planet. And we're just listening to all the smoke and mirrors. Well, anyway, all of that said, I think that if people don't get their Social Security checks, especially all of our family members that are above 65 years of age, many people elderly, and they live off those Social Security checks, if for whatever reason those Social Security checks don't come, well, then you have problems. Well, people, I'm going to now spend a long time digging into something I really didn't know much about until a couple of days ago, called dark, or you can call it a political philosophy if you want, called dark enlightenment. Now, I heard this term, I'm like, well, what's that? That's got to be good. Well, it is. It's relatively interesting. Now, if you want to follow along, I've linked to 4 articles right down by the tip link if you want to send in a tip and answer a question or ask a question. The 4 articles I'm going to read, which buckle up because they're long. And the reason I read these articles, people are like, why do you read these articles? It's so boring. I just want you to talk about Endgame, or well, tell me about Doomsday. Let's talk more. I mean, I have to tell you, what's going on right now in the real world since Trump's reelection and inauguration, I have to say, is probably the most interesting thing happening. Captain America: Brave New World, I liked it. It was fine. I saw it and didn't think much about it. But I have to tell you, on a daily basis, what's going on around the world right now is the most fascinating. I mean, I don't think I've lived in a time where I'm more engaged by what's going on in our world. I'm talking about on every level. And I also, I consider entertainment part of it. I mean, Sean Baker winning for a NOIR, 10 years ago, he was making movies with iPhones. Again, technological advancement. He made a movie called Tangerine, where he made it with iPhones, shooting things on Santa Monica Boulevard, probably stealing a lot of his shots, which is a really great film. 10 years later, he walks away with 4 Oscars. That's about technology. That's about power. That's about what you're able to do in this day and age if you have the wherewithal. You can think shit up and do anything you want. But we are now in the thrall of people. I don't want to call them tech bros. You're going to hear that word a lot about what I'm going to read. But there's so much interesting stuff going on. I mean, The Social Network came out, and, one of my favorite actors who starred in The Chocolate War played Peter Thiel in the movie The Social Network. You might ask who Peter Thiel is? Peter Thiel is on the world stage. Well, he was an investor. He was a hedge fund investor. One of the first investors. He was the first person that gave Mark Zuckerberg a significant amount of money to start Facebook. Now he's one of the most influential people on earth. But you can see him played by one of my favorite actors from The Chocolate War. I don't know what that has to do with anything. People are like, what's The Chocolate War? Well, Robert Cormier's novel, which no one's read now, but if you watch the book, I watched the movie that the book is based on. It's a terrific, Keith Gordon directed. I think it was his second feature. It's got a lot of great 80s music in it. I strongly recommend seeking out The Chocolate War. It did come out on Blu-ray. You can find it. But let's jump into an article. We're gonna get heady right off the bat. So buckle up, kids, because this is going to be an interesting night. This article comes to us. Where does it come to us from? From the New York Times. And this was written and actually it was published on February 13th, 2021. And it was written by Cade Mentz. Slate Star Codex was a window into the psyche of many tech leaders building our collective future. Then it disappeared. The website had a homely, almost slapdash design with a light blue banner and a strange name, Slate Star Codex. It was nominally a blog written by a Bay Area psychiatrist who called himself Scott Alexander, a near anagram of Slate Star Codex. It was also the epicenter of a community called the Rationalists, a group that aimed to re-examine the world through cold and careful thought. In a style that was erudite, funny, strange, and astoundingly verbose, the blog explored everything from science and medicine to philosophy and politics to the rise of artificial intelligence. It challenged popular ideas and upheld the right to discuss contentious issues. This might involve a new take on the genetics of depression or criticism of the Me Too movement. As a result, the conversation that thrived at the end of each blog post and in related forums on the discussion site Reddit attracted an unusually wide range of voices. It is the one place I know of online where you can have civil conversations among people with a wide range of views. Go figure, said David Friedman, an economist and legal scholar who was a regular part of the discussion. Fellow commentators on the site, he noted, represented a wide cross-section of viewpoints. They range politically from communist to anarcho-capitalist, religiously from Catholic to atheist, and professionally from a literal rocket scientist to a literal plumber, both of whom are interesting people. That's life. That's the way it should be. That's what this YouTube channel represents. The voices also included white supremacists and neo-fascists. The only people who struggled to be heard, Dr. Friedman said, were social justice warriors. They were considered a threat to one of the core beliefs driving the discussion: free speech. As the national discourse melted down in 2020, as the presidential race gathered steam, the pandemic spread, and protests mounted against police violence, many in the tech industry saw the attitudes fostered on Slate Star Codex as a better way forward. They deeply distrusted the mainstream media and generally preferred discussion to take place on their own terms, without scrutiny from the outside world. The ideas they exchanged were often controversial, connected to gender, race, and inherent ability, for example, and voices who might push back were kept at bay. Slate Star Codex was a window into the Silicon Valley psyche. There are good reasons to try and understand that psyche because the decisions made by tech companies and the people who run them eventually affect millions, well, I'd say billions. And Silicon Valley, a community of iconoclasts, is struggling to decide what's off limits for all of us. At Twitter and Facebook, leaders were reluctant to remove words from their platforms, even when those words were untrue or could lead to violence. At some AI labs, they release products including facial recognition systems, digital assistants, and chatbots, even while knowing they can be biased against women and people of color, and sometimes spew hateful speech. Why hold anything back? That was often the answer a rationalist would arrive at. And perhaps the clearest and most influential place to watch that thinking unfold was on Scott Alexander's blog. It is no surprise that this has caught on amongst the tech industry. The tech industry loves disruptors and disruptive thought, said Elizabeth Sandifer, a scholar who closely follows and documents the rationalists. But this can lead to real problems. The contrarian nature of these ideas make them appealing to people who maybe don't think enough about the consequences. The allure of ideas within Silicon Valley is what made Scott Alexander, who is also written under his given name, Scott Siskind, and his blog, Essential Reading. But in late June of last year, when I approached Mr. Siskind to discuss the blog, it vanished. The roots of Slate Star Codex trace back more than a decade to a polemicist and self-described AI researcher named Eliezer Yudkowsky, who believed that intelligent machines could end up destroying humankind. He was a driving force behind the rise of the rationalists. The rationalists saw themselves as people who applied scientific thought to almost any topic. This involved Bayesian reasoning, a way of using statistics and probability to inform beliefs. Because the rationalists believed AI could end up destroying the world, a not entirely novel fear to anyone who's seen science fiction movies, they wanted to guard against it. Many worked for and donated money to MIRI, an organization created by Mr. Yudkowsky, whose stated mission was AI safety. But it was the other stuff that made the rationalists feel like outliers. They were easily persuaded by weird contrarian things, said Robin Hanson, a professor of economics at George Mason University who helped create the blogs that spawned the rationalist movement. Because they decided they were more rational than other people, they trusted their own internal judgment. I'd like to interject here, and that's what happened with the eugenicists who made the genetic supermen in Star Trek, like Khan Noonien Singh. As Spock said, superior ability breeds superior ambition, something that is often forgotten amongst very special people. Many rationalists embraced effective altruism, an effort to remake charity by calculating how many people would benefit from a given donation. Some embraced the online writings of Neoreactionaries like Curtis Yarvin, who held racist beliefs and decried American democracy. They were mostly white men, but not entirely. Oh, we're going to get to Curtis Yarvin. Oh, yes, we will. The community was organized and close-knit. 2 Bay Area organizations ran seminars and high school summer camps on the rationalist way of thinking. The curriculum covers topics from causal modeling and probability to game theory and cognitive science. Hell, man, I wish I went to that summer camp. Read a website promising teens a summer of rationalist learning. How can we understand our own reasoning, behavior, and emotions? How can we think more clearly and better achieve our goals? The rationalists had regular meetups around the world, from Silicon Valley to Amsterdam to Australia. Some lived in group houses. Some practiced polyamory. They are basically just hippies who talk a lot more about Bayes' theorem than the original hippies, said Scott Aronson, a University of Texas professor who has stayed in one of the group houses. For Kelsey Piper, who embraced these ideas in high school around 2010, the movement was about learning how to do good in a world that changes very rapidly. Yes, the community thought about AI, she said, but it also thought about reducing the price of healthcare and slowing the spread of disease. Slate Star Codex, which sprung up in 2013, helped her develop a calibrated trust in the medical system. Many people she knew, she said, felt duped by psychiatrists, for example, who they felt weren't clear about the costs and benefits of certain treatment. That was not the rationalist way. There is something really appealing about somebody explaining where a lot of those ideas are coming from and what a lot of the questions are, she said. Then there's the people inventing the future. And here is Sam Altman, if you know who he is. Last June, as I was reporting on the Rationalists and Slate Star Codex, I called Sam Altman, chief executive of OpenAI. Remember, this is an article from 2021. An artificial intelligence lab backed by billions of dollars from Microsoft. He was effusive in his praise of Slate Star Codex. It was, he said, essential reading among the people inventing the future in the tech industry. Mr. Altman, who had risen to prominence as the president of the startup Accelerator Y Combinator, moved on to other subjects before hanging up. But he called back. He wanted to talk about an essay that appeared on the blog in 2014. The essay was a critique of what Mr. Siskind, writing as Scott Alexander, described as the Blue Tribe. In his telling, these were the people at the liberal end of the political spectrum whose characteristics included supporting gay rights and getting conspicuously upset about sexists and bigots. But as the man behind Slate Star Codex saw it, there was one group the Blue Tribe could not tolerate: anyone who did not agree with the Blue Tribe. Doesn't sound quite so noble now, does it? He wrote. Mr. Altman thought the essay nailed a big problem. In the face of the internet mob that guarded against sexism and racism, entrepreneurs had less room to explore new ideas. Many of their ideas, such as intelligence augmentation and genetic engineering, ran afoul of the Blue Tribe. Sound familiar? Mr. Siskind was not a member of the Blue Tribe. He was not a voice from the conservative Red Tribe, opposing gay marriage, getting conspicuously upset about terrorists and commies. He identified with something called the Gray Tribe, as many did in Silicon Valley. The Gray Tribe was characterized by libertarian beliefs, atheism, vague annoyance that the question of gay rights even comes up, and reading lots of blogs, he wrote. Most significantly, it believed in absolute free speech. Hear, hear. The essay on these tribes, Mr. Altman told me, was an inflection point for Silicon Valley. It was a moment that people talked about a lot, he said. He did not mention names, but Slate Star Codex carried an endorsement from Paul Graham, founder of Y Combinator. It was read by Patrick Collison, chief executive of Stripe, the billion-dollar startup that emerged from the accelerator. Venture capitalists like Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz follow the blog on Twitter. And in some ways, two of the world's most prominent AI labs, organizations that are tackling some of the tech industry's most ambitious and potentially powerful projects, grew out of the rationalist movement. And here's Peter Thiel, who I have to say, kind of a hero. In 2005, Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal and an early investor in Facebook, befriended Mr. Yudkowsky and gave money to Miri. In 2010, at Mr. Thiel's San Francisco townhouse, Mr. Yudkowsky introduced him to a pair of young researchers named Shane Legg and Demis Hassibis. That fall, with an investment from Mr. Thiel's firm, the two created an AI lab called DeepMind. Like the rationalists, they believed that AI could end up turning against humanity. And because they held this belief, they felt they were among the only ones who were prepared to build it in a safe way. In 2014, Google bought DeepMind for $650 million. The next year, Elon Musk, who also worried AI could destroy the world, and met his partner, Grimes, because they shared an interest in a rationalist thought experiment, founded OpenAI as a DeepMind competitor. Both labs hired from the rationalist community. Life in the Grey Tribe. Part of the appeal of Slate Star Codex, faithful readers said, was Mr. Siskind's willingness to step outside acceptable topics. But he wrote in a wordy, often roundabout way that left many wondering what he really believed. Mr. Aronson, the University of Texas professor, was turned off by the more rigid and contrarian beliefs of the rationalists, but he is one of the blog's biggest champions and deeply admired that it didn't avoid live wire topics. It must have taken incredible guts for Scott to express his thoughts, misgivings, and questions about some major ideological pillars of the modern world so openly, even if protected by a quasi-pseudonym, he said. It was the protection of that quasi-pseudonym that rankled Mr. Siskind when I first got in touch with him. He declined comment for this article. As he explored science, philosophy, and AI, he also argued that the media ignored that men were often harassed by women. He described some feminists as something close to Voldemort, the embodiment of evil in the Harry Potter books. He said that affirmative action was difficult to distinguish from discriminating against white men. In one post, he aligned himself with Charles Murray, who proposed a link between race and IQ in the bell curve. In another, he pointed out that Mr. Murray believes black people are genetically less intelligent than white people. He denounced the Neoreactionaries, the anti-democratic, often racist movement popularized by Curtis Yarvin. Again, more on him later. But he also gave them a platform. His blog role, the blogs he endorsed, included the work of Nick Land, a British philosopher whose writings on race, genetics, and intelligence have been embraced by white nationalists. In 2017, Mr. Suskind published an essay entitled "Gender Imbalances Are Mostly Not Due to Offensive Attitudes." The main reason computer scientists, mathematicians, and other groups were predominantly male was not that the industries were sexist, he argued, but women were simply less interested in joining. I believe that to be true, actually. That week, a Google employee named James Damore wrote a memo arguing that the low number of women in technical positions at the company was a result of biological differences, not anything else. A memo he was later fired over. One Slate Star Codex reader on Reddit noted the similarities to the writing on the blog. Mr. Siskind, posting as Scott Alexander, urged this reader to tone it down. Huge respect for what you're trying, but it's pretty doomed, he wrote. If you actually go riding in on a white horse waving a paper marked Anti-Diversity Manifesto, you're just providing justification for the next round of purges. Who needs a safe space? I can't pronounce this guy's name. Balaji Srinivasana. I can't pronounce that. No disrespect. In 2013, Mr. Thiel invested in a technology company founded by Mr. Yarvin. So did the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, led in the investment by Balaji Srinivasan, who was then a general partner. That year, when the tech news site TechCrunch published an article exploring the links between the Neoreactionaries, the rationalists, and Silicon Valley, Mr. Yarvin and Mr. Srinivasan traded emails. Mr. Srinivasan said they could not let that kind of story gain traction. It was the preview of an attitude I would see unfold when I approached Mr. Siskind in the summer of 2020. Mr. Srinivasan could not be reached for comment. If things get hot, it may be interesting to sick the dark Enlightenment audience on a single vulnerable hostile reporter to dox them and turn them inside out with hostile reporting sent to their advertisers, friends, contacts, Mr. Srinivasan said in an email viewed by the New York Times, using a term, dark Enlightenment, that was synonymous with the neo-reactionary movement. But others, like Mr. Thiel, urged their colleagues to keep quiet, saying in emails they were confident the press would stay away. They were right. In late June of last year, not long after talking to Mr. Altman, the OpenAI chief executive, I approached the writer known as Scott Alexander, hoping to get his views on the rationalist way and its effect on Silicon Valley. And that was when the blog vanished. The issue, it was clear to me, was that I told him I could not guarantee him the anonymity he'd been writing with. In fact, his real name was easy to find because people had shared it online for years, and he'd used it on a piece he'd written for a scientific journal. I did a Google search for Scott Alexander, and one of the first results I saw in the autocomplete list was Scott Alexander Siskind. Mr. Siskind said in a late-night post on Slate Star Codex that he was going to remove his blog from the internet because the Times threatened to reveal his full name. He said this would endanger him and his patience because he had attracted many enemies online. I woke up the next morning to a torrent of online abuse, as did my editor, who was named in the farewell note. My address and phone number were shared by the blog's readers on Twitter. Protecting the identity of the man behind Slate Star Codex had turned into a cause among the rationalists. More than 7,500 people signed a petition urging the New York Times not to publish his name, including many prominent figures in the tech industry. Putting his name in the Times, the petitioners said, would meaningfully damage public discourse by discouraging private citizens from sharing their thoughts in blog form. On the internet, many in Silicon Valley believe everyone has the right not only to say what they want, but to say it anonymously. Amid all this, I spoke with Manuel Horta Ribeiro, a computer science researcher who explores social networks at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne. I think it's Lausanne. Technology in Lausanne. I've never been there. That's why I don't know how to pronounce it. I'd like to go. I've been to Switzerland, though. I've been to Davos and Zurich. He was worried that Slate Star Codex, like other communities, was allowing extremist views to trickle into the influential tech world. A community like this gives voice to fringe groups, he said. It gives a platform to people who hold more extreme views. But for Kelsey Piper and many others, the main issue came down to the name and tying the man known professionally and legally as Scott Siskind to his influential and controversial writings as Scott Alexander. Miss Piper, who is a journalist herself for the news site Vox, said she did not agree with everything he'd written, but she also felt his blog was unfairly painted as an on-ramp to radical views. She worried his views could not be reduced to a single newspaper story. I assured her my goal was to report on the blog and the rationalists with rigor and fairness, but she felt that discussing both critics and supporters could be unfair. What I needed to do, she said, was somehow prove statistically which side was right. When I asked Mr. Altman if the conversation on sites like Slate Star Codex could push people toward toxic beliefs, he said he held some empathy for these concerns, but he added, people needed a forum to debate ideas, something I also agree with. In August, Mr. Siskind restored his old blog posts to the internet. And 2 weeks ago, he relaunched his blog on Substack, a company with ties to both Andreessen Horowitz and Y Combinator. He gave the blog a new title, Astral Codex 10. He hinted that Substack paid him $250,000 for a year on the platform, and he indicated the company would give him all the protection he needed. And in his first post, Mr. Siskind shared his first name. So again, I would like to give credit where credit is due for that article. That article was written for the New York Times by Cade Metz, M-E-T-Z, and it was originally published on February 13th, 2021. Now, that sort of gives you guys some context in terms of Slate Star Codex, the idea that these people that are in Silicon Valley, some of them who command unimaginable wealth, were there to discuss all different kinds of ideas. Ideas, everything from genetics, which is sketchy, but also the future of artificial intelligence. But these are the things, when people have the power to literally shape our planet globally on an afternoon, these are the kind of things people are thinking about because they can. So, again, when, as the geneticists who created the Superman in the Star Trek episode Space Seed, and later we saw Khan Noonien sing in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and we're going to hear more from him. Naveen Andrews will be playing him in the Nicholas Meyer and then David Mack, Kirsten Byers scripted Khan audio miniseries that's coming. We'll hear more about what happens when superior ability breeds superior ambition. Now, before I jump into article number 2, I'm going to look and see what you guys are saying about this. We'll see. Hold on. Let me just jump in and see what you guys have to say. So let's go up to Lucas Texvenger says, Rob, thanks for the mention of the Secret Wars Omnibus earlier today. I went to the website and got it for a really good price. Well, that's great to hear. What Lucas is talking about is one of my favorite places to buy. I don't know if you can see, but I'm surrounded by probably 300 omnibuses. I love omnibuses and hardcovers for my comics. And one of my favorite places to go is cheap graphic novels. They have great deals, even more better than Amazon. So and tell them Rob Burnett sent you. I don't know if they'll ever give me a, I really want my Secret Wars graphic Omni, but they have really great prices. So check it out. So Lucas, thanks for going there, and love to hear that. And by the way, I do not get any kind of a sponsorship from, I don't really get sponsorships from anybody other than I will say that Kino Lorber sends me stuff. I'm doing work for Lionsgate Limited, so they're sending me some material because I'm writing articles for their website. But I don't get monetary sponsors from many of the places that I like. I just shout them out because I like them. And, if you go there and buy things, tell them I sent you. Brett Dean, let's see, is he from Shout Select? I don't know. He's a member of the channel. Says, apropos of nothing on tonight's topic, the rumor of Shatner's return to Trek seems like the ultimate emergency button pushed by Kurtzman after Section 31. I will say this. I don't know if this is true, but in Nicholas Meyer's original 3 scripts for the Khan miniseries that was not going to be an audio drama at first, but they were going to make it a 3-night event series, Captain Kirk is in it in episode 1. And maybe they have Shatner coming back voicing Kirk, which I could definitely see happening. But I have no reason to think that. I don't know if that's true. Darth Plato says, hey, Rob, check your email. I sent you a letter about dark enlightenment. I will do that. I can't do that now because I've set up this show already and I have a lot to get through, but it'd be great to read tomorrow as a rebuttal. Rebel Sky says, I've got a new moniker for you, Rob Sire. Welcome to the Burnettwork, a place where everyone can know your meme. It'll be a great outro. I like that. That's pretty good. I need a piece of artwork for it. Kenneth Colton says, hail, Robert the Bruce. My heart breaks for thy tariffs. Ye shall pay on hot toys and physical media. At least we get Daredevil tomorrow. And the 8th episode of Paradise drops at midnight tonight. Woohoo! Smognosis. His 10th super chat, or their 10th super chat. Plumbers and rocket scientists aren't that far apart, Rob. They both make it safe for people to blast off Amen. Thomas Bennett says, why did post-apocalyptic stories become instruction for tech giants' manuals when they were meant to be warnings? You may have answered this. Well, I think as I get further into that, I definitely will. So I'm going to jump into this next article, and before people are going to get triggered, okay? It's from the Trumpland's diary, and look, I'm just saying, whether you like Donald Trump, whether you don't like Donald Trump, I'm just saying that what we are seeing the country go through since his inauguration is highly unusual. You're seeing the entire global Western world, the power shift. You now have Russian delegates, Russian politicians coming out and talking about how great their new alliance with America is. This is not usual. This flies in the face of 80 years, and everyone's asking themselves, especially our allies, what the fuck is going on? And rightfully so. So I'm kind of taking a wait-and-see attitude approach. But there's something going on. There always is. All the smoke and mirrors. I mean, look, I look at it this way. Again, not to talk necessarily about conspiracy theories, but there's something that I've wanted to believe, that we have been visited by extraterrestrials. I've wanted to believe that since I was a kid. When I was growing up on Mercer Island, I would go to the local library, and I've said this before, I read every book in the library on everything from spontaneous human combustion, the Bermuda Triangle, and certainly all the books on UFOs. And in one of those books, there was an account about Captain John Harder, he flew every plane in World War II, and then he became a commercial pilot. And it was like an account of him talking about seeing something he couldn't explain, couldn't understand, call it a UFO. Well, the thing that interested me about this account in a book that I found at the library was one of my dad's best friends was Captain John Harder. So I think I might have been like 9 or 10, and I got to go see a very decorated pilot who'd flown every plane in World War II. He gave me a gigantic model, a monogram model of a B-52 that I had built, and it was hanging in my bedroom, off my bedroom ceiling. I actually got to go ask somebody who had a UFO account in a book, who was one of my dad's best friends. I got to go as a kid and go ask him about this very thing. So I heard a first-hand account from somebody whose story was in a book about UFOs, and ask him, Captain John, I called him Captain John, did you really see a UFO? And basically he told me he did see something that he couldn't understand, that he couldn't explain, that flew in the face of everything he knew about aeronautics. And I'm like, he goes, I can't tell you if it was a UFO or not. I can just tell you I saw something I didn't understand. And that's all he could tell me. But the story I read in the book was true. And I always thought, it made me think about, like, if you think about UFOs, let's just say, let's go for a moment, if disclosure happens, there's congressional hearings about UAPs now. If you think about it, if we had been being visited, and if extraterrestrials had augmented human development over the course, the Younger Dryas era, what happened according to Graham Hancock and whatever, all the stuff that we've heard. Let's assume, just for the sake of argument, for the time being, that there was extraterrestrials who visited Earth, and some of their technology are aerospace firms. People had it. I mean, Bob Lazar said that there was an archaeological aspect to technology they found. They dug it up because there's no reason to think that extraterrestrials happen to show up in the last 100 years. Why wouldn't? Of course, they might have shown up 12,500 years ago. Maybe they showed up because there was a catastrophe, and they knew that there was life here, and they came to maybe warn people. And somehow that catastrophe, their ships were damaged, and let's just say they were here. And let's say people have them on ice. If we had proof that there was actual extraterrestrial involvement in human history, or were reverse engineering technology, they could never let that information out. Our primitive way of looking at the universe, I mean, most of us are religious. I mean, we have a group of people in the Middle East, the Jews, that are 15 million strong on the planet, and then you have another group in the Middle East that want to exterminate them. I mean, they want the Jews gone. They've been trying to kill the Jews for thousands of years. Imagine if those people understood that their own prophet did not have the last word of God, because there are extraterrestrials, there are beings that are way more advanced than we are. What would that do to the religions of the world? Maybe the Vatican already knows this, but the fact is, it would tear our civilization apart. We are not mature enough to deal with the ramifications of irrefutable proof that there are aliens amongst us, or that there were aliens amongst us. We couldn't allow it to happen. And on the other hand, if we do have this technology and people are reverse engineering it, the conspiracy to keep this a secret is not such a conspiracy as it is one protection, but also there's a business component to it. Most conspiracies are all about doing business and money and power, and that's it. So, it's twofold. Yeah, you want to keep that technology to yourself because you can get rich beyond the dreams of avarice for it, or you're trying to protect society from tearing itself apart because our primitive ideas of God and the universe would maybe not survive understanding that our religions would be entirely negated by proof that a more advanced civilization exists out in the universe that isn't us. So that's something that is to be considered. Again, for me, it's just worth pondering. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying there's a reason to think about it. So now, as we jump into this, I'm going to jump into something that goes all the way back to the rationalists and dark enlightenment and our political situation, which is happening right now. I offer this not necessarily because I believe in it, but I offer it as information that I would encourage everybody to think about, read about, go down those rabbit holes, find out if any of this is true. Again, I mean, people are always coming at me, oh, Rob, this, that. No one ever, it's like nobody reads the articles I post unless I read them myself. So it's like I encourage everybody not to get all angry and triggered by this. Just think about it and know I'm presenting it like that blog, that codex that we were just talking about, to offer and hopefully get some good discussion going. So here it goes. I jump into this with eyes wide open. The Trump Land Diary. Democracy is done. The rise of the corporate monarchy. This is by Shane Almgren. Shane Almgren. And this is on Facebook. Again, the links for these are in the show notes down below. All right. It's finally time to answer the million-dollar question that's on everyone's mind. Why is all this insanity happening in our government? If you don't know what the ultimate agenda is, this first 3 weeks of Trump's presidency looks an awful lot like a nonsensical shitstorm wrapped in a dumpster fire, wrapped in a chaos hurricane, wrapped in a Jewish space laser-induced wildfire. Absolutely none of it makes any sense. Only it actually does, in a terrifying sort of way. The first thing to remember is that real life isn't like a movie, where the bad guys are all part of the same unified organization trying to take over the world. There are a number of bad actors with secret goals, and the one thing we may have working in our favor is that the ones we do know about clearly have different objectives, so it's entirely possible they sabotage each other before any of them successfully pull off their own baddie agendas. First, we've got Project 2025, whose long game seems to be implementing a sort of far-right extremist quasi-authoritarian political regime within the current American political structure, where conservative ideologies are shoved down everyone's throats, whether they like it or not. The current immigrant roundup is part of this agenda, as was the ending of Roe v. Wade, banning trans people, dismantling gay marriage, which is coming soon, insisting climate change isn't real, and waging nonstop culture war issues on mostly non-existent problems. See CRT and cat litter in classrooms. Most of Trump's more controversial executive orders, not involving Elon and Doge, are part of the Project 2025 agenda. Then we've got the Christian Reconstructionists, see also Dominionists, and the New Apostolic Reformation, whose long game is rejiggering the Constitution to make America less of a democratic republic and more of a Christian theocracy. Based on the teachings of R.J. Rushdoony, whose chief disciple Mike Johnson is currently third in line for the presidency as Speaker of the House. This agenda acknowledges that, 1, the secularists are actually correct that the Founding Fathers never set America up as a Christian nation founded on Christian principles, and 2, the Founding Fathers got it wrong in that regard. America was supposed to be a Christian nation, and it's their God-given duty to fix what the founders screwed up. This group wants to install Christian nationalism and legislate biblical morality according to their very narrow interpretations. Project 2025 wants to outlaw gays. The Reconstructionists want to execute them. They're basically the American Taliban for Jesus. Thankfully, they remain on the fringe and haven't had much success implementing their backwards-ass agenda other than minor victories like mandating the Ten Commandments and Bibles in every classroom in places like Louisiana and Oklahoma, where no one knows how to read anyway. Finally, we've got a third group, the one that's responsible for all the chaos Elon and Doge are causing. Their agenda is actually far more extreme than either Project 2025 or the Reconstructionists. And the scary thing is, they're already implementing their freakish plan at warp speed, while most of the country is busy bickering about all the quaint Project 2025 garbage and Trump's usual unending fire hose of idiotic nonsense. There's a few key players we're going to have to cover some backstory for, namely Elon Musk, J.D. Vance, and a guy you might have heard of by the name of Peter Thiel, and a guy you almost certainly haven't, Curtis Yarvin. These guys are all connected in a mildly horrifying way, and we're about to unpack it all. Once upon a time in the 90s, Elon Musk founded a small company called X. No, not Twitter, a different X. Dude just has Asperger's and an inexplicable fixation with the letter X. X was a fledgling digital banking service that allowed people to transact with vendors and each other without cash, checks, or plastic. At the same time Musk was building out X, another young entrepreneur, a German immigrant named Peter Thiel, was building a very similar money transfer service right across town called Confinity. Rather than compete with each other, Musk and Peter Thiel decided to merge their two companies in 1999, with Musk named CEO of the new company. Shortly after the merger, Musk was fired as CEO by the board, who replaced him with Peter Thiel. After Thiel took over, the company's name was changed to PayPal. PayPal attracted some of the most promising young talent in Silicon Valley, and its early members wielded so much power and influence in the tech space that they became collectively known as the PayPal Mafia. Besides Musk and Peter Thiel, the PayPal Mafia included Stephen Chen, Chad Hurley, and Jawed Karim, the co-founders of YouTube, Russell Simmons and Jeremy Stoppelman, co-founders of Yelp, Max Levchin, the current CEO of Affirm, Roelof Botha, a partner at Sequoia Capital, David Sachs, the founder of Genie.com and Yammer, Trump's new AI crypto czar, Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn, early investor in Facebook, currently on the board at Microsoft, Jack Selby, co-founder of Clarion Capital with Peter Thiel, Yashan Wang, CEO of Reddit, founder of Terraformation Incorporated, and Primel Shah, founder of Kiva and on the board at Change.org, plus a dozen others. The PayPal Mafia churned out a who's who in the big tech space, with nearly everyone involved becoming billionaires many times over. Today, it's one of the wealthiest and most influential collection of individuals, not just in America, but in the entire world. In 2002, eBay acquired PayPal for $1.5 billion. Although no longer officially with PayPal after being ousted, Elon still held around 10% of the company's shares and netted roughly $160 million in the sale. So that's the Peter Thiel Elon Musk connection. Now, let's see how J.D. Vance is tied into this crew. Hold on a second. In 2011, Peter Thiel gave a talk at Yale, where J.D. Vance was attending law school. Changing the course of Vance's life, as J.D. recounts it, Vance called Thiel possibly the smartest person he'd ever met, and decided to pivot from a career in law to one in venture capital. In 2015, J.D. joined the Thiel-founded Mithril Capital, with Thiel as his personal mentor. In 2016, Vance published Hillbilly Elegy, a memoir of a family and a culture in crisis, thrusting his name into the national spotlight for the first time. It was at this same time that Vance, unencumbered by any political aspirations or pretense and therefore free to speak his actual mind, sent his Yale roommate an email regarding America's leading presidential candidate, Donald Trump, that read, "I go back and forth between thinking Trump is a cynical asshole like Nixon, who wouldn't be that bad and might even prove useful, or that he's America's Hitler. How's that for discouraging?" Vance left Thiel's firm in 2017 and joined a DC-based investment firm. Then, he launched his own venture capital firm in 2019 with financial backing from Thiel, billionaire VC capitalist Mark Andreessen, who you remember was a frequent reader of the blog I was just talking about, and former Google CEO Eric Schmidt. For reasons we'll get into in just a minute, around the time the pandemic was starting to wind down, Peter Thiel decided it was finally time for him to own a U.S. senator and start pulling long-awaited political strings. He figured that since he'd funded Vance's VC firm and essentially owned Vance already, he'd just migrate that ownership from the private sector to the public. Because J.D. Vance had been an open critic of Donald Trump during Trump's entire first run, Thiel invited Vance down to Mar-a-Lago to smooth things over in hopes that getting an endorsement from the Orange Jesus. Thiel informed Vance of his plans to make him a senator, so Vance scrapped all of his previous principles, decided power was more gooder than having any convictions, kissed Trump's ring, and earned the endorsement. Thiel, for his part, poured an ungodly amount of his own money into Vance's Senate campaign, about $15 million, marking the largest donation to a single Senate candidate in American history. In addition to his personal $15 million, Thiel also recruited 10 major donors for Vance, including a couple of old tech buddies from the PayPal Mafia, who chipped in $1 million each. If you've ever found yourself wondering how the author of Hillbilly Elegy, a lawyer-turned-venture capitalist with no political experience or aspirations and a vocal critic of Donald Trump, came out of nowhere and managed to snag Trump's endorsement and win a Senate seat in his first foray into politics, there's your explanation. Peter Thiel orchestrated, arranged, and funded the entire thing. A tech billionaire bought himself a senator. Now, the next question is, why? This is where it starts to get scary. It's time to meet the final character in our story, Curtis Yarvin. Yarvin is a software developer and tech entrepreneur who started blogging in 2003 under the pen name of Mencius Moldbug at unqualified-reservations.org. He's perhaps best known for founding the anti-egalitarian, anti-democratic philosophical movement known as Dark Enlightenment, or the Neoreactionary movement, NRX. Like most people, Yarvin sees a lot of problems in society, but unlike most people, the problems he sees and his solutions to these problems are dystopian fringe at best and democracy-ending suicide at worst. In a nutshell, Yarvin's Dark Enlightenment political worldview is that real power in the U.S. resides in an informal collaboration of universities and the mainstream media that he calls the cathedral, which collude to sway public opinion. He admires the former Chinese communist leader Deng Xiaoping for his pragmatic and market-oriented authoritarianism, and believes that America's commitment to equality and justice erodes social order, and advocates for an America monarch to dissolve elite academic institutions and media outlets ASAP. A regular speaker at various libertarian and techno-fascist conferences, Yarvin's position is that the democratic governments are inefficient and wasteful and should be replaced with sovereign corporations whose shareholders elect an executive with total power over the country and corporation. You can see how a kid who loved the movie Rollerball sat up and was reading this going, because, man, I certainly did. As Yarvin explains it, unencumbered by liberal democratic procedures, the executive could rule like a CEO monarch. And just in case it still isn't abundantly clear what Curtis Yarvin thinks is the solution to what ails America, here is his most straightforward phrasing. Quote, "If Americans want to change their government, they're going to have to get over their dictator phobia." They're going to have to get over their dictator phobia. Yes, Curtis Yarvin is an unapologetic proponent of dictatorships, since there's no real difference between a dictator and a CEO. And corporations under the rule of a CEO appear to work just fine, as he puts it. Nations like the United States are outdated software systems that need to be broken up into smaller entities called patchworks, which would be controlled by tech corporations, unquote. As he put it in an interview with the New York Times on January 18th, democracy is done. Now I know what you're thinking. Shane, this is the author of the article, this Yarvin dude is clearly off his rocker. Nobody in their right mind would take this corporate monarchy nonsense seriously. Why are you wasting everyone's time explaining in detail the techno-fascist manifesto ramblings of some internet pop philosopher who calls himself Menzies Moldbug? Dude sounds like he's living in some Matrix meets Hunger Games dystopian fantasy world. Surely nobody takes this dude's crazy ideas seriously. Well, that's where you'd be wrong. Perilously wrong. Curtis Yarvin's two biggest disciples and advocates for his technocratic ideas are, drumroll, Peter Thiel and Vice President J.D. Vance, the MAGA heir apparent. The three of them have been friends since at least 2009, after Yarvin's writings and ideologies became super popular within the PayPal Mafia circle. Yarvin is a big enough political influence on Vance that old Vance can't stop name-dropping him and spewing his more sinister ideas. There's a YouTube link if you want to go in. I put this article link in the description. See, people forget that billionaires have political ideologies just like everyone else. And remember, most people's political ideologies are generally tailored to improve the life of the person holding them. Democracy sounds great if you're a peasant living under a king with no say in how things are run. But in what way would democracy improve your life if you're a multi-billionaire who can buy politicians? Once you're up that high on the food chain, democracy is no longer a step up, it's a step down. So, all of these filthy rich, filthy powerful tech bros have jumped on board with turning America into a corporation run by a CEO with authoritarian power. According to them, the masses don't need to be voting. The masses are idiots. Or as Yarvin puts it, the masses are asses. The PayPal Mafia has no interest in becoming beholden to the whims of a bunch of dumbass rednecks from Kentucky. If they're going to be free to lead their best lives, they're going to need to unshackle themselves from the masses who can't even figure out life enough to afford groceries. Put bluntly, those who can write a check for a few billion and not even notice it's gone are not interested in the opinions of anyone bitching about the cost of 12 eggs. or late Social Security checks. As Peter Thiel once wrote in a Cato essay, I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible. Now, supposing they were actually going to attempt to pull this techno coup off, what would it look like in practice? Thankfully, Yarvin has had the plan mapped out for years. With a little strategy, he's given the acronym RAGE, which stands for Retire All Government Employees. It would look exactly like what we're all looking at right now. Elon's haphazard, chaotic coup of federal agencies is anything but. This has been the plan all along by these Yarvin acolytes. Gut the federal workforce, either by mass firings or incentivizing them to resign, crippling the entire government in the process, at which point big tech corporate solutions that just so happen to already be on hand can step in and take over the reins of running our government. Since you could never get away with doing this as a blatant hostile takeover, you just frame the entire exercise as an audit to weed out fraud and corruption, then watch the gatekeepers roll out the red carpets and cheer the whole takeover on. I know it sounds like tinfoil hat conspiracy, but look at what's happening in front of your eyes. Isn't it a little weird that J.D. Vance came out of nowhere to win a Senate seat? And weirder still that Peter Thiel managed to convince Trump to make this virtual nobody his running mate, even though Vance was the most unpopular VP pick in polling history? Wasn't it a bit strange that Donald Trump told a bunch of evangelicals at a rally, vote for me this one time and I'll make sure you never have to vote again? What the hell did that mean? Isn't it slightly too coincidental that Peter Thiel's original business partner, Elon Musk, is currently running roughshod through the American government, doing exactly what Curtis Yarvin says needs to happen? This isn't conspiracy land at this point. These dudes told everyone what they wanted to do, and then they started doing it while we all watch dumbfounded. The left is going, surely they can't be doing what it sure as hell looks like they're doing, taking over the government. And the right is just cheering them on because it makes the libtard snowflakes cry. So there's your explanation. Elon Musk, J.D. Vance, and Peter Thiel are executing a long-planned agenda to take over the government. Donald Trump is... Now, I apologize for this language. I think it just isn't good, but I'm going to read it as written. Donald Trump is just a dementia-addled old man along for the ride, ranting about windmills and magnets and taking over canals and content to just sign large pieces of papers for the TV cameras all day. Hopefully, the chaos makes a little bit more sense now. I told you weren't going to like it. And this was written on, by the way, February 14th. I've created a Substack and reposted this with links and sources for anyone wanting to do further research. And so there you go. Now, I know, again, I'm offering this as interesting information. And I'm coming at it as a science fiction fan who's read about dystopian futures and watched movies about dystopian futures my whole life. And I've always wondered, how do they happen? You know, Sinclair Lewis, it can't happen here. Or can it? So let's see if anyone else has anything to say. Let's see. A performing artist says, I'm so vindicated about the Oscars. I love to see that Anora, No Other Land, and I'm Still Here get love. Need to see a real pain and flow still. Yes, absolutely. I thought it was great. I thought the Oscars were great this year, and I like to see the love go around. Thomas Bennett says, we are the aliens. Aliens are the original Earthlings. That makes the most sense to me. Maybe. That I honestly don't know if that's true or not, but there's certainly that theory is certainly out there. Evan Newman sends in a tip. And Evan Newman asks a good question. Evan Newman says, Rob, are there any movies or shows or books that current events are drawing you back to? I rewatched They Live the other night, and it sure hits differently today. Yes. How about anything on the topic of social and civic self-destruction? Evan, those are great questions. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of, there's a lot of hysterical science fiction, and a lot of it is post-apocalyptic. I would say that Children of Men is something I go back to because the birth rates in Western nations are falling. People are having less sex. I would say a lot of what's going on. These are only we've been being programmed for a long time, and this isn't a conspiracy theory, but our Black Mirrors here have given many bad actors or many people that want to manipulate people en masse a great way to do it. We're carrying a device that is literally programming us to do all different kinds of things and changing our psychological makeup. It's not hard. It's our brain chemistry and dopamine hits and all that. And, you go back to Yuri Bezmenov and talk about Russia capturing the United States. It's if you go watch that Yuri Bezmenov interview, a KGB defector to Canada. His interview is from 1984. If you watch it, it's shocking because it's all being played out. The idea that suddenly, why is Vladimir Putin, who has been killing Ukrainians and stealing children and taking them back to Russia, why is it all of a sudden, Donald Trump's going to stop the war? Okay, I get that, but what about, are the kids coming back? Is Donald Trump going, you guys have to return all the children that you've taken from the Ukrainians and give them back? When are you going to do that? You don't see any of that. Where's the concessions? It's just, nope, we want their mineral rights, we're going to stop the war. And you couldn't have asked if we'd fought a war, our now destabilization with our European allies that happened in a fucking afternoon or a weekend. You couldn't have asked for this. Putin is laughing his ass off. So are the Chinese. So are the North Koreans. Say what you want, but we have been programmed to believe, damn, we can't give all that money over. It's like, why do you think that European and worldwide global stability is an important thing to have in this day and age? Tariffs with Canada and Mexico go into effect tonight at midnight, I guess. Is that a good thing? How is this a good thing? And yet half the country is like, great. And I don't know enough, to be honest, whether it's a good thing, a bad thing. I certainly know it's out of the norm. And it's one thing to go out and break things, but it's a whole other thing to break apart. The Constitution is under attack. Our European allies are wondering what the fuck is going on. Putin is smiling his ass off. So are the North Korea in D.C. Thomas. Really? I'm presenting these articles as food for thought, and you can go look into this yourself. And the article's pure garbage. Libs today. I hate that language. It's so, it undermines your credibility when you use language like that. It really does. Libs today. It's not, what are libs? Can you define a lib? What is a lib? Do they all fall under one umbrella? These articles, these connections that are being drawn, you're not even commenting on anything about what I read. You're not commenting on, did Peter Thiel finance J.D. Vance? Did any of the things that I just read actually happen? And if they did happen, you can't say that these things are unfounded. Look into it yourself. I would say to everybody, don't take one article don't go look into it. The problem is no one's doing that. I'm presenting articles, I'm presenting information, and asking you all to do your own research and make up your own minds. But you know what? According to recent polling and recent research, 60% of Americans read at a 6th grade or less level, which is part of the fucking problem. No one is going out and learning. No one's going out and asking questions. They're just sitting around going, yeah, fuck the libtards. I'm tired of that bullshit. I'm trying to be open-minded. I'm trying to look at everything that's going on and wondering and asking questions. I didn't know what dark enlightenment even was until 2 days ago, and I did a deep dive, which brings me to my next article. And let's read it. This is a New York Times interview with, this is another long one, but it's really interesting, with Curtis Yarvin. The New York Times did an interview that was published on January 18th of this year, 2025. And we're going to jump into it. Although something happened and I need to fix. Let me fix so I can have this article up. I don't know why this suddenly it went away. I don't know why it went away. Hold on. Let me bring it back. And we shall see. Here we go. And this article, oh, now I have to fix it again. Damn it. Let me just fix it. I pre-set up this show to get all these articles set up. So again, I apologize why I fix it so you can follow along when I read. And I don't know why, but I did have this all fixed and ready to go. And for whatever reason, it's not fixed and it's not ready to go. So here we talk about this purveyor of dark enlightenment. And let me we'll jump into it right now. Article number 3. And this David Marchese wrote this, and it was published on the New York Times on January 18th, 2025. Curtis Yarvin says democracy is done and powerful conservatives are listening. For a long time, Curtis Yarvin, a 51-year-old computer engineer, has written online about political theory in relative obscurity. His ideas are pretty extreme, that institutions at the heart of American intellectual life, like the mainstream media and academia, have been overrun by progressive groupthink and need to be dissolved. He believes that government bureaucracies should be radically gutted, and perhaps most provocative, he argues that American democracy should be replaced by what he calls a monarchy run by what he has called a CEO, basically his friendlier term for a dictator. To support his arguments, Yarvin relies on what those sympathetic to his views might see as helpful servings of historical references, and what others see as a highly distorting mix of gross oversimplification, cherry-picking, and personal interpretation presented as fact. But while Yarvin himself may still be obscure, his ideas are not. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance has alluded to Yarvin's notions of forcibly ridding American institutions of so-called wokeism. The incoming State Department official Michael Anton has spoken with Yarvin about how an American Caesar might be installed into power, and Yarvin also has his fans in the powerful and increasingly political ranks of Silicon Valley. Mark Anderson, the venture capitalist turned informal advisor to President-elect Donald Trump, has approvingly cited Yarvin's anti-democratic thinking, and Peter Thiel, a conservative mega-donor who invested in tech startups of Yarvin's, has called him a powerful historian. Perhaps unsurprising given all this, Yarvin has become a fixture of the right-wing media universe. He's been a guest on the shows of Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk, among others. I've been aware of Yarvin, who mostly makes his living on Substack, for years, and was mostly interested in his work as a prime example of growing anti-democratic sentiment in particular corners of the internet. Until recently, those ideas felt fringe, but given that they are now finding an audience with some of the most powerful people in the country, Yarvin can't be so easily dismissed. So here's the author asking questions, and I will read the questions and the responses. One of your greatest arguments is that America needs to, as you've put it in the past, get over our dictator phobia, that American democracy is a sham, beyond fixing, and having a monarch-style leader is the way to go. So why is democracy so bad, and why would having a dictator solve the problem? And here's Yarvin's answer. Let me answer that in a way that would be relatively accessible to readers of the New York Times. You've probably heard of a man named Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who, by the way, is a character in True Noir, The Assassination of Anton Cermak, our great audio drama that you can get at truenoir.co. The author says yes. Here's Yarvin. I do a speech sometimes where I'll just read the last 10 paragraphs of FDR's first inaugural address, in which he essentially says, "Hey, Congress, give me absolute power, or I'll take it anyway." So, did FDR actually take that level of power? Yeah, he did. There's a great piece that I've sent to some people that I know of that are involved in the transition. Who? Oh, there's all sorts of people milling around. Name one. Well, I sent the piece to Mark Andreessen, an excerpt from the diary of Harold Ikes, who was FDR's Secretary of the Interior, describing a cabinet meeting in 1933. What happens in this cabinet meeting is that Francis Perkins, who's the Secretary of Labor, is like, "Here, I have a list of projects that we're going to do." FDR personally takes this list, looks at the projects in New York, and is like, "This is crap." Then at the end of the thing, everybody agrees that the bill would be fixed and then passed through Congress. This is FDR acting like a CEO. So is FDR a dictator? I don't know. What I know is that Americans of all stripes basically revere FDR, and FDR ran the New Deal like a startup. And here's the author again. The point you're trying to make is that we've had something like a dictator in the past, and therefore it's not something to be afraid of now. Is that right? And Yarvin says, yeah. To look at the objective reality of power in the U.S. since the Revolution, you'll talk to people about the Articles of Confederation, and you're just like, name one thing that happened in America under the Articles of Confederation, and they can't unless they're a professional historian. Next, you have the first constitutional period under George Washington. If you look at the administration of Washington, what is established looks a lot like a startup. It looks so much like a startup that this guy, Alexander Hamilton, who was recognizably a startup bro, is running the whole government. He's basically the Larry Page of this republic. Curtis, I feel as if I'm asking you, what did you have for breakfast? And you're saying, well, you know, at the dawn of man, when cereals were first cultivated. Okay, I'm doing a Putin. I'll speed this up, says Yarvin. Then answer the question, what's so bad about democracy? Yarvin says, to make a long story short, whether you want to call Washington, Lincoln, and FDR dictators, the opprobrious word, they were basically national CEOs, and they were running the government like a company, from the top down. Well, then, so why is democracy so bad? It's not even that democracy is bad, it's just that it's very weak. And the fact that it's very weak is easily seen by the fact that very unpopular policies like mass immigration persist despite strong majorities being against them. So the question of, is democracy good or bad, is, I think, secondary to the question, is it what we actually have? When do you say to a New York Times reader, or when you say to a New York Times reader, democracy is bad, they're a little bit shocked. But when you say to them, oops, I didn't mean to do that. But when you say to them, politics is bad, or even populism is bad, they're like, of course, these are horrible things. So when you want to say democracy is not a good system of government, just bridge that immediately to saying that populism is not a good system of government, and then you'll be like, yes, of course. Actually, policy and laws should be set by wise experts and people in the courts and lawyers and professors. Then you'll realize what you're actually endorsing is aristocracy rather than democracy. It's probably overstated to the extent which you and J.D. Vance are friends. Oh, it's definitely overstated. But he has mentioned you by name publicly and referred to de-wokification ideas that are very similar to yours. You've been on Michael Anton's podcast talking with him about how to install an American Caesar. Peter Thiel has said you're an interesting thinker. So let's say people in positions of power said to you, hey, we're going to do this Curtis Yarvin thing. What are the steps that they would take to change American democracy into something like a monarchy? And Curtis Yarvin says, my honest answer would have to be, it's not exactly time for that yet. No one should be reading this panicking, thinking I'm about to be installed as America's secret dictator. I don't think I'm even going to the inauguration. Were you invited? No, man, I'm an outsider. I'm an intellectual. The actual ways my ideas get into circulation is mostly through the staffers who swim in this very online soup. What's happening now in D.C. is there's definitely an attempt to revive the White House as an executive organization which governs the executive branch. And the difficulty with that is if you say to anyone who's professionally involved in the business of Washington that Washington would work fine or just better if there was no White House, they'll basically be like, yeah, of course. The executive branch works for Congress. So you have these poor voters out there who elected, as they think, a revolution. They elected Donald Trump, and maybe the world's most capable of CEO is in there. Your point is that the way the system is set up, he can't actually get that much done? He can block things. He can disrupt it. He can create chaos and turbulence, but he can't really change what is. Do you think that maybe you're overstating the inefficacy of a president? You could point to the repeal of Roe as something that's directly attributable to Donald Trump being president. One could argue that the COVID response was attributable to Donald Trump being president. Curtis Yarvin says, certainly many things about COVID were different because Donald Trump was president. I'll tell you a funny story. Sure. At the risk of bringing my children into the media, in 2016, my children were going to a Shishi progressive Mandarin immersion school in San Francisco. Wait, you sent your kids to a Shishi progressive school? I'm laughing. Of course, Mandarin immersion. When the rubber hits the road, you can't isolate children from the world, right? At the time, my late wife and I adopted the simple expedient of not talking about politics in front of the children. But of course, everyone's talking about it at school, and my son comes home and he has this very concrete question. He's like, Pop, when Donald Trump builds a wall around the country, how are we going to be able to go to the beach? I'm like, wow, you really took him literally. Everybody else is taking him literally, but you really took him literally. I'm like, if you see anything in the real world around you over the next 4 years that changes as a result of this election, I'll be surprised. Here's Curtis Yarvin. In one of your recent newsletters, you refer to J.D. Vance as a normie. What do you mean? Yarvin laughs. The thing that I admire about Vance, and that's really remarkable about him as a leader, is that he contains within him all kinds of Americans. His ability to connect with flyover Americans in the world he came from is great. But the other thing that's neat about him is that he went to Yale Law School. So he's a fluent speaker of the language of the New York Times, which you could not say about Donald Trump. And one of the things that I believe really strongly I haven't touched on is that it's utterly essential for anything like an American monarchy to be president of all Americans. The new administration can do a much better job of reaching out to progressive Americans and not demonizing them and saying, hey, you want to make the country a better place? I feel like you've been misinformed in some ways. You're not a bad person. This is like 10 to 20% of Americans. This is a lot of people. The NPR class. They're not evil people. They're human beings. We're all human beings, and human beings can support bad regimes. I guess I'm an NPR person, according to Curtis Yarvin. As you know, that's a pretty different stance from the stance you often take in your writing, where you talk about things like de-wokeification, how people who work at places like the New York Times should all lose our jobs. You have an idea for a program called RAGE, Retire All Government Employees. You have ideas that I hope are satirical about how to handle non-productive members of society that involve basically locking them in a room forever. Has your thinking shifted? No. My thinking is definitely not shifted. You're finding different emphasis. When I talk about RAGE, for example, both my parents work for the federal government. They were career federal employees. Well, that's a little on the nose from a Freudian perspective. It is. But when you look at the way to treat those institutions, treat it like a company that goes out of business, but sort of more so, because these people, having had power to have actually been treated even more delicately and with even more respect. Winning means these are your people now. When you understand the perspective of the new regime with respect to the American aristocracy, their perspective can't be this anti-aristocratic thing. We're going to bayonet all the professors and throw them in ditches or whatever. Their perspective has to be that you are a normal person serving a regime that did this really weird and crazy stuff. How invested do you think J.D. Vance is in democracy? He says, Curtis Yarvin says, it depends what you mean by democracy. The problem is when people equate democracy with good government. I would say that what J.D. Vance believes is that government should serve the common good. I think that people like J.D. Vance and people in the broader intellectual scene around him would all agree on that principle. Now, I don't know what you mean by democracy in this context. What I do know is that if democracy is against the common good, it's bad. And if it's for the common good, it's good. There was reporting in 2017 by BuzzFeed. They published some emails between you and the right-wing provocateur Milo Yiannopoulos, where you talked about watching the 2016 election with Peter Thiel and referred to him as fully enlightened. What would fully enlightened have meant in that context? Fully enlightened for me means fully disenchanted. When a person who lives within the progressive bubble of the current year looks at the right or even the new right, what's hardest to see is that what's really shared is not positive belief, but an absence of belief. We don't worship these same gods. We do not see the New York Times and Harvard as divinely inspired in any sense, nor do we see their procedures as one that always leads to truth and wisdom. We do not think the U.S. government works well. And this absence of belief is what you call enlightened? Yes. It's a disenchantment from believing in these old systems. And the things that should replace that disenchantment is not, oh, we need to do things Curtis's way. It's basically just a greater openness of mind and a greater ability to look around and say, we just assume that our political science is superior to Aristotle's political science because our physics is superior to Aristotle's physics. What if that isn't so? The thing that you've not quite isolated yet is why having a strong man would be better for people's lives. Can you answer that? Yes. I think that having an effective government and an efficient government is better for people's lives. When I ask people to answer that question, I ask them to look around a room and point out everything in the room that was made by a monarchy, because these things that we call companies are actually little monarchies. You're looking around and you see, for example, a laptop, and that laptop was made by Apple, which is a monarchy. This is an example you use a lot, where you say if Apple ran California, wouldn't it be better? Whereas if your MacBook Pro was made by the California Department of Computing, you can only imagine it. I'm sorry, I'm here in this building and I keep forgetting to make my best argument for monarchy, which is that people trust the New York Times more than any other source in the world. How is the New York Times managed? It's a fifth-generation hereditary absolute monarchy. And this was very much the vision of the early progressives, by the way. The early progressives, you go back to a book like Drift and Mastery. I have to say, I find the depth of your background information to be obfuscating rather than illuminating. Well, how can I change that? By answering the questions more directly and succinctly. Ha ha ha, fine, I'll try. Your ideas are seemingly increasingly popular in Silicon Valley. Don't you think there's some level on which that world is responding because you're just telling them what they want to hear? If more people like me were in charge, things would be better. Curtis says, I think that's almost the opposite of the truth. There's this world of real governance that someone like Elon Musk lives in every day at SpaceX, and applying that world thinking, oh, this is directly contradictory to the ideas I was taught in this society, that's a really difficult cognitive dissonance problem, even if you're Elon Musk. It would be an understatement to say that humanity's record with monarchs is mixed at best. The Roman Empire under Marcus Aurelius seems as if it went pretty well. Under Nero, not so much. Spain's Charles III is a monarch you point to a lot. He's your favorite monarch. But Louis XIV was starting wars as if they were going out of business. Those are all before the age of democracy. And then the monarchs in the age of democracy are just terrible. Terrible, I can't believe I'm saying this. If you put Hitler aside and only look at Mao, Stalin, Pol Pot, Pinochet, Idi Amin, we're looking at people responsible for the deaths of something like 75 to 100 million people. Given that historical precedent, do we really want to try a dictatorship? Your question is the most important question of all. Understanding why Hitler was so bad, why Stalin was so bad, is essential to the riddle of the 20th century. But I think it's important to note that we don't see for the rest of European and world history a Holocaust. You can pull the camera way back and basically say, wow, since the establishment of European civilization, we didn't have this kind of chaos and violence, and you can't separate Hitler and Stalin from the global democratic revolution that they're a part of. I noticed when I was going through your stuff that you make these historical claims, like the one you just made about no genocide in Europe between 1000 AD and the Holocaust, and then I poked around. It's pretty like, is that true? My skepticism comes from what I feel is a pretty strong cherry-picking of historical incidents to support your arguments, and the incidents you're pointing to are either not factually settled or there's a different way of looking at them. But I want to ask you a couple of questions about stuff you've written about race. Okay, I'll read you some examples. This is the trouble with white nationalism. It's strategically barren. It offers no effective political program. Well, to me, the trouble with white nationalism is that it's racist, not that it's strategically unsophisticated. Well, there's two more. It's very difficult to argue that the Civil War made anyone's life more pleasant, including that of freed slaves. Come on. Yarvin's actual quote called it the War of Succession, not the Civil War. And the third one, if you ask me to condemn Anders Breivik, the Norwegian mass murderer, but adore Nelson Mandela, perhaps I have a mother I'd like you to fuck. Look, when you look at Nelson Mandela, the reason I said that, most people don't know this, there was a little contretemps when Mandela was released because he actually had to be taken off the terrorist list. Well, maybe the more relevant point is that Nelson Mandela was in jail for opposing a viciously racist apartheid regime. The viciously racist apartheid regime, they had him on a terrorist watch list. So what does this have to do with equating Anders Breivik, who shot people on some bizarre, deluded mission to rid Norway of Islam, with Nelson Mandela? Well, because they're both terrorists, and they both violated the rules of war in the same way, and they both basically killed innocent people. We valorize terrorism all the time. So Gandhi is your model? Martin Luther King? Nonviolence? Well, it's more complicated than that. Is it? I could say things about either, but let's move on to one of your other examples. I think the best way to grapple with African Americans in the 1860s, just Google the slave narratives. Go and read random slave narratives and get their experience at the time. There was a recent historian who published a thing, and I would dispute this number is too high, but his estimate was something like a quarter of all freedmen basically died between 1865 and 1870. I can't speak to the veracity of that, but you're saying there are historical examples in slave narratives where the freed slaves expressed regret at having been freed? To me, this is another prime example of how you selectively read history because other slave narratives talk about the horrible brutality. Well, absolutely. Difficult to argue that the Civil War made anyone's life more pleasant, including freed slaves? Okay. First of all, when I said anyone, I was talking about a population group rather than individuals. Are you seriously arguing that the era of slavery was somehow better than... If you look at the living conditions for an African American in the South, they are basically at their nadir between 1865 and 1875. They are very bad because basically the economic system has been disrupted. I can't believe I'm arguing this. Brazil abolished slavery in the 1880s without a civil war. So when you look at the cost of war or the meaning of the war, it visited this huge amount of destruction on all sorts of people, black and white. All of these evils and all of these goods existed in people at this time, and what I'm fighting against in both of those quotes, also in the way people respond to Breivik, basically you're responding in the cartoonish way. What is the difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter? That's a really important question in 20th century history. To say that I'm going to have a strong opinion about this stuff without having an answer to that question, I think is really difficult and wrong. You often draw on the history of the pre-democratic era and the status of women in that time period, which you valorize, is not something I've seen come up in your writing. Do you feel as if your arguments take enough into account the way the monarchs and dictatorships historically have been not great for swaths of demographics? When I look at the status of women in, say, a Jane Austen novel, which is well before enfranchisement, it actually seems kind of okay. Women who are desperate to land a husband because they have no access to income without that? Have you ever seen anything like that in the 21st century? I mean, the whole class in Jane Austen's world is the class of universal basic income earning aristocrats, right? You're not willing to say that there were aspects of political life in the era of kings that were inferior or provided less liberty for people than political life does today? You just did a thing that people often do where they confuse freedom with power. Free speech is freedom. The right to vote is a form of power. So the assumption that you're making is that through getting the vote in the early 20th century in England and America, women made life better for themselves. Do you think it's better that women got the vote? I don't believe in voting at all. Do you vote? No. Voting basically enables you to feel like you have a certain status. What does this power mean to you is really the most important question. I think that what it means to most people today is that it makes them feel relevant. It makes them feel like they matter. There's something deeply illusory about the sense of mattering that goes up against the important question of we need a government that is actually good and actually works, and we don't have one. The solution that you propose has to do with, as we've said multiple times, installing a monarch, a CEO figure. Why do you have such faith in the ability of CEOs? Most startups fail. We can all point to CEOs who have been ineffective, and putting that aside, a CEO or dictator is more likely to think of citizens as pure economic units rather than living, breathing human beings who want to flourish in their lives. So why are you so confident that a CEO would be the kind of leader who could bring about better lives for people? It seems like such a simplistic way of thinking. It's not a simplistic way of thinking. And having worked inside the salt mines where CEOs do their CEOing, and having been a CEO myself, I think I have a better sense of it than most people. If you took any of the Fortune 500 CEOs, just pick one at random, and put him or her in charge of Washington, I think you'd get something much, much better than what's there. And it doesn't have to be Elon Musk. Earlier, you said that regardless of what his goals are, Trump isn't likely to get anything transformative accomplished. But what is your opinion of Trump generally? Well, I talked about FDR earlier, and a lot of people in different directions might not appreciate this comparison, but I think Trump is very reminiscent of FDR. What FDR had was this tremendous charisma and self-confidence combined with the tremendous ability to be the center of the room, be the leader, cut through the BS, and make things happen. One of the main differences between Trump and FDR that has held Trump back is that FDR is from one of America's first families. He's a hereditary aristocrat. The fact that Trump is not really from America's social upper class has hurt him a lot in terms of his confidence. That's limited him as a leader in various ways. And one of the encouraging things that I do see him executing with somewhat more confidence this time around. It's almost as if he actually feels like he knows what he's doing. That's very helpful because insecurity and fragility is his Achilles heel. Well, what's your Achilles heel? Well, I also have self-confidence issues. I won't bet fully on my own convictions. Are there ways in which your insecurity manifests itself in your political thinking? Well, that's a good question. If you look at especially my older work, I had this kind of joint consciousness that, okay, I feel like I'm onto something here, but also the idea that people would be in 2025 taking this stuff as seriously as they are now when I was writing in 2007, 2008, I mean, I was completely serious. I am completely serious. But when you hit me with the most outrageous quotes you could find from my writing in 2008, the sentiments behind that were serious sentiments, and they're serious now. Would I have expressed it that way? Would I have trolled? I'm always trying to get less trollish. On the other hand, I can't really resist trolling Elon Musk, which might be part of the reason why I've never met Elon Musk. Do you think your trolling instinct has gotten out of hand? No, it hasn't gone far enough. What I realize when I look back is that the instinct to revise things from the bottom up is very much not a trollish instinct. It is a serious and important thing that I think the world needs. And this is, of course, by David Marchese, and this interview was in the New York Times, and you can find a link to it in the description below. So this is the gentleman that many of these people are acolytes of, and that's, of course, his name is Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin. And he's one of the acolytes of the Dark Enlightenment movement, or there's people who are acolytes of him. So let's see if anybody has anything to say to that. I don't even know if anyone's still listening to this, but let's see. 200 Watt Studio says, Rob, the Robservatory looks great. I love the lighting. Oh, thanks. But you're always looking at I don't have my To Live and Die in LA thing up, though. Thoughts on liberal commentator Keith Olbermann? Oh, a performing artist asked this. You know, I used to like Keith Olbermann a long time ago. I think look, the way I consider myself a left-leaning classical liberal. And it's been really hard to see how the left presents its ideas, or progressive present their ideas lately. A lot of it is done with a very hysterical bent that I don't quite understand, that I don't think helps anyone. I think that we have to provide an environment. The best way to provide an environment to talk is if people know that they're being listened to. Don't get hysterical. Don't name call. I mean, that's the first way to set people off. And we're not mature enough to be like, yo, hey, let's have a conversation. I mean, one of the things that I wanted this channel to be about was, it started with my idea of this channel would be like going to a panel at a science fiction convention or a comic convention or whatever. You know, I grew up since I was 10 years old going to conventions, and I used to love going into listening to the people that I admire, whether it was authors or filmmakers or whoever was on the panel, listening to them talk and hearing what they had to say, and raising your hand and asking, or even at film festivals, listening to, I went to the Seattle Film Festival growing up a lot and would love to listen to filmmakers speak. And the whole point was to listen to them to talk and know that they knew something that you didn't know. And you wanted to hear what they had to say. I don't understand what's happened to that kind of discourse. I mean, the monumental infantilization and dumbing down of the American population, which, by the way, I do believe is by design, has been speeded up in our social media age, and it doesn't get any better. And look, the problem is because it's really easy. I'm talking to you right now I'm looking at a green light, and I can say whatever the fuck I want, and I don't have to deal with the consequences of someone looking at me right in the eye. A real human being. You know, real human beings with wants and needs and desires and opinions, you know? And part of what's happened to our discourse is that when you're not accountable to somebody looking right in your eyes as you're having a conversation, you can say whatever you want, as inflammatory as it is. And I think that's terrible. I think it's been terrible for our discourse. I think it's been terrible for our politics. I think it's been terrible for the thinking that goes on. You know, I love to go back and watch people like, you know, Christopher Hitchens debate conservatives, or to listen to these great intellects that could sit on a stage and respectfully have conversations with people. Look, I'm a big fan of Douglas Murray, not necessarily just because of his positions on Israel, but because I've read his books. You know, I mean, he has a lot to say, and yeah, he's very inflammatory to a lot of progressives, but he's not wrong. You know, and people can't deal with reality anymore. They can't just sit down, and you can't debate. When you have movements of people that won't allow you to ask questions without branding you an ist or a phobe, we have a problem. And the problem isn't people that want to have conversations. The problem is with people that will shut down conversations. If you have to shut down a conversation, if you are worried to hear someone else's point of view, that's because your point of view is not strong enough to survive scrutiny. And that's problematic. That's not me giving, I'm not, you know, it's just, and this is the problem. If you're shouting somebody else's opinion down, hey, maybe their opinion sucks. But you know what? The best way to bring it to the light of day, bring it into the sunlight. Sunlight is the great purifier. If an idea is bad, it won't be accepted. But if you're shouting, if your ideology or your belief system is not strong enough to stand up to scrutiny, or intelligent debate, fuck you. then your position's ridiculous. I don't want to know. I don't want to know you. You have to allow intelligent debate. You have to allow your position to be looked at and to be examined. You have to, because truth will out. And there is no your truth or my truth. There's the truth. And the only way to get to the truth is being allowed to allow your position, whatever it may be, to be opened up to scrutiny. And that might be painful and difficult, but it's got to happen. It's got to happen. So, Darth Plato says this article is an application to an insane asylum. Yeah. Volker then, what a cool name. And by the way, what a generous, that is very nice of you. Thank you for that. Volker then says, being your age and being the same kind of sci-fi enthusiast, I know exactly what you're talking about. Recently, I got tired of reading one dystopian novel after the other because dystopia is indeed unfolding on the outside. All the best from Germany. Volker, you're absolutely right. And the funny thing is, I feel like, did you not read these books or watch these movies? I mean, how many corporate societies, I mean, did you not see THX 1138? Let's not even talk about reading Brave New World or 1984 or Animal Farm or any of those great works, but it's like, you haven't seen those movies? I mean, before George Lucas made Star Wars, he made THX 1138, and you know what's so funny? How many Star Wars fans have actually bothered to go back and watch THX 1138? Because what's really interesting is THX 1138 is as much about the empire that George Lucas was talking about in Star Wars as anything else. It's so frustrating to be a fan of science fiction cinema or cinema in general when you hear people that go on and on and on about Star Wars that haven't bothered to go back and see THX 1138. How can you want to watch Star Wars and not go back and want to see what George Lucas was doing? I mean, first of all, Luke Skywalker's a character from American Graffiti, so to go back and watch American Graffiti is to gain insight into who Luke Skywalker is as a character. And then to watch all of Star Wars and what unfolds in his 4 Star Wars movies that he directed. How can you not want to go back and watch THX 1138 and look at what he was dealing with there, because it's all from the same creative mind. I used to think, because I would do that when I was a kid. I'm like, I saw Star Wars when I was 10. I'm like, I have to see THX 1138. I couldn't see it. The first time I actually got to see it was on videotape, on Warner Home Video, probably in 1980. And you had to want to go see this. But yeah, Volker, you're right, man. We live in this dystopian world that's unfurling around us, in front of us. It's like people aren't paying attention. Thomas Logan says, if tomorrow Elon unveils the cure for cancer, most libs will still shit on him because most libs are spineless. Their agenda trumps their common sense. But okay, Thomas, how can you, that's like saying one kind of people are all the same way. I mean, libs, what is there a lib club that you all, you're casting, you're calling an entire group of people. I mean, what does the word liberal mean? It just means you're open to new ideas. The problem is, libs in your mind are some caricature of that idea. And I don't think so. By the way, I'm a huge Elon Musk fan. I think what he's done, and I'm tired of people going, well, he didn't create those companies, he just bought them. Yeah, he did what any entrepreneur does. And it's too bad, because Tesla, are Tesla cars perfect? No, but the technology he's created is amazing. The guy landed rockets from orbit on barges at sea. Nobody had ever done that before. He's pushing the boundaries. I don't know if I want him in our government, because he's doing what Curtis wants him to do. But we're going to read one more article. But I don't think people are going to hate Elon Musk. I think a lot of people really like Elon Musk, but it's very difficult to see. It's difficult to look at what he's done, revolutionizing space travel, Starlink, the Boring Company, building tunnels in Vegas, what he's done with his car company, the Tesla company, and how he's revolutionizing a lot of human history. And then looking at what he's doing in Washington, you're like, wait. What's going on here? What's happening? And the way he acts and the way he speaks, and when he goes into the Oval Office and does these whole things, he undermines his own credibility with a lot of people, which I'm still a fan. But if he came up with a cure for cancer, I think that might be interesting. REG has been a member for 12 months. Now, I have one last article to read, and again, it's not. So the person Curtis Yarvin, that I was just reading the interview with, this article is going to talk about that, and we're going to get back into Dark Enlightenment. And this is from the Financial Times. The Financial Times, and it was published on February 10th. The strange political philosophy motivating Elon Musk. Inside the rise of Dark Enlightenment's neo-reactionary movement. Again, this article, there's a link in the description below. And this is by Rana Forur. Rana Forur. I have always been a huge science fiction fan, and I find these days that it's helping me in my work life. Great science fiction often deals with geopolitical issues, broad social pendulum shifts, and large-scale systems failure. Think Dune or Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy, which I inhaled when I was about 12 and I reread for fun every decade or so. All of these are in play today, particularly in the U.S., where politics is totally in flux. The Democratic Party is trying to find its center. Catholics are playing a bigger role in politics than they have in decades. Trump is throwing out new and bizarre ideas every day, and MAGA and Musk are colliding. Among all these vectors, one of the weirdest and most disturbing developments is the rise of the Neoreactionary movement, NRX, also called Dark Enlightenment. The name alone is spooky and intriguing. NRX is an ideology founded by the British philosopher Nick Land and the American software developer Curtis Yarvin, who was recently interviewed in the New York Times, as you just heard. The philosophy argues that democracy inherently leads to social decline because of the development of deep state bureaucracies that are unable to control oligarchic forces, and that societies should be run like corporations, with a kind of CEO monarch in charge. As Yarvin has said, if Americans want to change their government, they need to get rid of dictator phobia. One way of dealing with that is hire two executives and make sure they work together, and there is really no other solution. Are Trump and Musk these people? Some think so. Between Trump's 19th century style tax, tariff, and territorial seizure threats, and Musk's attempted takeover of the plumbing of the federal government, see my column today on why is Treasury meddling, which has been temporarily thwarted by a federal judge in the U.S. is so worrisome. It feels like there's a kind of self-coup happening in America right now, and some people I've spoken to in both political and technological circles feel that it's been driven by the Dark Enlightenment crowd, which includes, by the way, remember, the article I started here was written in 2021, and this was written last month. And some people I've spoken to in both political and technological circles feel that it's been driven by the Dark Enlightenment crowd, which includes many of the people from Peter Thiel to Mark Andreessen to Musk himself, who stand to benefit most from it. As Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir, which has seen its stock price surge off the back raft of expected government contracts, said recently, this is a revolution, and some people get their heads cut off. Maya Angelou once said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. The techno-libertarians in Silicon Valley have been showing us who they are for a long time now. Check out this incredible Cades Metz piece. That was the first article I read, which is a back and forth between Thiel, Yarvin, and investor Balaji, I can't pronounce that name, talking about how Dark Enlightenment forces should be turned on journalists who write unfavorable pieces. Then there are the various Musk statements like this one. I think it's a false dichotomy to look at government and sort of industry as separate. Government is the ultimate corporation, he says, referring to it as a monopoly that can't go bankrupt or usually can't go bankrupt. I could go on and on with interviews and articles in which Musk and the tech bros say things that make it clear they long for a world without government, but perhaps the clearest indication is what they've done. Seized control of the Office of Personnel Management, allowed a bunch of 20-something Doge recruits with no government affiliation into the Treasury, attempted to shut down congressionally authorized departments like USAID, and fired anyone who disagrees. Sounds like a self-coup to me. And then ahead of the German elections, by the way, she's going to be talking to somebody, Richard Waters. Richard, you're sitting in San Francisco. How real is dark enlightenment? And does what's happening in the White House now have any serious ties to it? Or should I go back to reading science fiction? What a fascinating question, Richard Waters responds. If only this was just a sci-fi plotline we're discussing. I've always felt techno-libertarianism has been more a product of intellectual arrogance, self-interest, and misdirected idealism rather than any kind of coherent ideology. But I think now, surprised at its own political ascendance, we're watching a powerful ideology harden in real time. Will we look back on this as dark enlightenment? I hope not. I think much of this has its roots in intellectual culture in Silicon Valley that is aptly summed up in that New York Times story you linked to on the rationalists. People pride themselves on an engineering mindset that values taking everything back to first principles. Questioning received orthodoxies is the point. It can lead to outlandish ideas being given airtime, particularly when people are talking about things they know little about. You find yourself in sweeping, simplistic discussions that remind you of late-night college dorms. No one has thrived on the push-the-boundaries thinking quite like Elon Musk. I don't think he's had a moment of self-doubt in his life. He'll respond with absolute certainty to any question you put to him. Impatience doesn't leave room for self-reflection. If his ideas are so good for humanity, why should anything be allowed to get in the way? There have always been people in the background ready to fit a more rigidly libertarian ideological framework to this impulse. Yarvin strikes me as a bit of a clown and hard to take seriously, but Peter Thiel has always been worth paying attention to. This amazing piece he wrote just after the financial crisis arguing that freedom is incompatible with democracy bears reading. Thiel's answer was to escape politics into new realms opened up by technology like cyberspace or Mars. But that was back in 2009. There comes a moment when you get so rich and powerful you can't hide from government anymore. You have to take it over. A few things have converged to create this techno-reactionary moment. I think we should take people like Mark Andreessen at their word when they say they swung right because of a woke ideology that forced tech leaders to bow down to their own workforces. Mark Zuckerberg's recent pivot toward Trump wasn't just political opportunism. He was frustrated at being pushed into clamping down on his company's social networks. I don't disagree with him. But to me, the bigger forces at work here have more to do with the techno-oligarchs' ambition and impatience. They also believe that technologies like crypto and artificial intelligence could remake society and the economy and are certainly too important to be left to government bureaucrats. Musk's assault on government feels visceral. Yes, it's hard not to see naked self-interest. What government regulator would dare take him on now? But I think it's more of a product of impatience and frustration. That government is holding him, and by extension, anyone trying to invent the future, back, while consuming resources for no overall social benefit. The only answer, sweep it all away. Trump's willingness to surrender the remaking of government to outside interests has provided an opening that will never come again. It really does feel like a revolutionary moment. Overreach seems inevitable. So I figured that was worth reading as well. Again, the link to that from the Financial Times is down below. I mean, my whole thing is this. I keep going back to Yuval Harari's book Sapiens and the follow-up Homo Deus, where in Sapiens he basically tells a 100,000-year history of humanity, and then Homo Deus is about moving into the future. But at the end of Sapiens, and I've talked about this a lot on this channel, he asks the question that we, humanity, the one race of humanity, there's only one race of humanity on this planet. There's different ethnicities, sure, but there's one race of human beings on this planet. And we are a glorious bunch when we want to be. But Yuval Harari asks the question, we need to figure out and ask ourselves, who do we want to be as a race? Now, unfortunately, we're dealing with a world now where you have your unbelievable intellects and unbelievably capable people like the Peter Thiels in the world, like the Elon Musks in the world, like all the venture capitalists, like the people like Mark Zuckerberg who coded his way into immortality creating Facebook. These are people that are amazing human beings. Unfortunately, they are few and far between on this planet, especially in a country like America where we don't even teach civics and provide people with an education that's worth getting, which is an incredible crime. And look, I think that Americans, for our own national security, healthcare and education should come first. We need a smart, healthy population to compete on the world stage. And right now we're not doing that. And, I do like hearing new things like the Trump administration saying the Department of Education has not helped out very much over the last 30 years. All we've done is slip in stature in terms of our educated population. I see it every day. We have to do something different. And in that sense, yes, let's focus on education. Let's focus on getting us eating food that's healthy. Let's start looking at all of our people in America and figuring out how we can lift them up. And maybe the democratic norms can change, but I still believe in democracy. I still believe in the Constitution. I still believe in the Bill of Rights. And not just because we the people, not just because of Schoolhouse Rock, in order to form a more perfect union. I mean, I learned it. But anyway, if you went on this journey with me, I want to thank you for listening to it all. All I want to say is that we are living through fascinating times, and each day things are happening so fast that this world of ours has suddenly become more interesting than any Marvel movie or more interesting than any Star Wars movie. Now, I don't know if it's going to be more interesting than the last episode of Paradise, which airs in 40 minutes, if you can go see it on Hulu, which I will, or if it's going to be more interesting than Daredevil. All I'm saying is that we live through incredibly interesting times, and the more educated and the more knowledgeable anybody can become about what's happening. I mean, I'll tell you, the greatest show on earth is happening right outside your window right now on a global scale. We are living through what's going to be a very important historical period of time. And rather than get hysterical or depressed about what's happening, become knowledgeable, become involved, seek out what you don't know, and ask yourself those big questions. And I think we live in a time that's definitely worth exploring and watching and experiencing, because I haven't seen anything like that happen before. REG says Argentina did what Doge is doing and won. Well, I can only hope so, but it's a slippery slope. I mean, look, I fear that someone's going to look at my Amazon buying history and you run some analytics against the movies that I've bought over the last 25 years and come up with some psychological profile of me. I think probably it would be pretty favorable, but what if it wasn't? And somebody comes on my door and knocks and says, here's a list of the books you bought, here's a list of the music you bought. And I know it sounds absurd, but that possibility exists. I mean, Tipper Gore's wife started the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Center, and wanted to get rid of Prince's Purple Rain because of songs like Darling Nikki. And she was a Democrat. I saw that happen. I was like, you can pry my Prince records out of my fingers, out of my cold, dead fingers. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for watching this show. I hope, if you want to, if you were bored listening to my voice, look at those articles down below. And hey, the Dark Enlightenment movement is very interesting. I want to delve into it more. Scary ideas of eugenics and all kinds of craziness. But remember, there's just one race of us on this planet. We're unique. And, hey, if disclosure happens, bring it on. Is Steven Spielberg really making a movie about disclosure? And if he's really making a movie about disclosure, is he doing it to soften us up? We're having congressional hearings because, man, if there's one thing I've wanted to see, it's aliens my whole life. Make it happen. I hope it's not the To Serve Man aliens or the Independence Day aliens, maybe, more like the Close Encounters aliens, but aliens nonetheless. Let's bring them on. That'd be the greatest thing in the next 4 years if disclosure happens. It's probably not gonna, but it'd be great. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I want to thank my moderating staff. I hope I didn't put Tom Jr. Jackson through too much hell if he's here, and we'll see. But I want to thank everybody for generously supporting this channel via Super Chats and tips and memberships. By the way, you can become a member of the channel for as low as 99 cents. We had a great member call. There was some new people on the member call this weekend that I hadn't seen before, so thank you all for coming. And I'm sure tomorrow I'm going to be talking about Paradise and Daredevil. But all this stuff, there's some interesting stuff going on, and I would encourage everyone, the internet, it's so easy to find information. It's amazing, this newfangled contraption we have. You never know what you're going to find at the end of any, just the proper keystrokes in the proper order. But thanks for being here, everybody. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to everyone, have a better night. And who knows what's going to happen tomorrow.